guys, this is a Lament configuration horror podcast. My name is Greg Knox, and I'm joined, as always, by someone with twice as many Instagram followers as the population of the Pacific island Tuvalu, our resident body count girl, Rhea Fend.
Hi, Greg. Well, it wouldn't be horror if there weren't boobs involved, would it now?
Exactly. So, on today's show, we are back to our video Nasties. So these are the 72 films found in Section 2 of the Video Recordings Act 1984. And, as at least one of the films we're going to talk about today is pretty grim and very nasty, Rhea has a very appropriate warning for all the y'all out there in Radio Land.
Okay, yes, I've got my usual warning. Warning, the following broadcast may contain spoilers, extreme language, violence, and topics considered graphic or adult, not for those of a sensitive disposition. The Lament Configuration podcast is not responsible for any side effects such as hysterical laughter, nausea, increased horror knowledge, or extreme arousal.
Yeah, extreme arousal could happen at any time in this show, my dulcet tones. So, anyway, the theme of...
Was that true about that island, by the way?
Yes, I looked it up, and yes, you have more Instagram followers than both Tuvalu and the Vatican City.
Oh, nice, okay. I might put that on my CV now, you know.
Hi, exactly.
What an achievement.
It's very impressive, and I wanted to let everyone know. So, the theme of our show today is going to be an absolute laugh riot, because all three films that we're discussing today are about men who kill women because of a trauma in their past. So this is definitely going to be a very fun show to do, I'm sure. And on that note, the very first film that we're going to talk about is Don't Go in the House, which is directed by Joseph Ellison. And interestingly, this was never an official alternative title, but a working title for the film was The Burning, which was obviously taken by another film, which we previously reviewed on episode number 4.
I can understand why it might have been called that, yeah.
Yes, because there is a lot of burning. In fact, fire does play a very prominent element in the film itself. So, Rhea, tell us about Don't Go in the House.
It's a 1979 film, and the brief synopsis is: a disturbed young man who was burned as a child by his sadistic mother stalks women with a flamethrower. Whoa. I have to say, I wasn't expecting this, but I really like this film. It's awesome.
Okay, that wasn't the reaction I was expecting, I'm not going to lie. So, yeah, tell us, what was it that you liked about it so much?
We've talked, I think I've mentioned before that one of my biggest fears is fire. I think I might have mentioned it because I've been taking fire eating lessons. And yeah, this film, I just wasn't expecting it to be that amazing. I thought it was going to be kind of, after our last show with all the don'ts, I thought it was going to be quite sort of mediocre, but this is quite a dark film, and I can't believe, like, the plot and his background and everything like that. There's just so much depth to it, and like I say, it's really dark, so I'd recommend this film. I'm going to enjoy talking about it today.
Yeah, I mean, I also enjoyed the film. I was quite surprised, because this is, I mean, it depends on sort of your point of view, but even for someone like me, who's a pretty sick motherfucker and has seen, like, pretty much the majority of the films that you're supposed to see that are really dark and misanthropic, this is a pretty grim film. You have to
really
admit that.
creepy. It's really creepy. And, hello, he's got a fucking flamethrower. Oh my god.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of putting it.
Well, yeah, he worked. So this guy who was tortured by his mum when he was young, she like burned his arms and compared it to the fact that his sins will be washed from him if she burns his arms, because it's like hell. Like she compares like burning his arms to him being put through hell, which I just think is so creepy and dark. And he works at an incinerator, which just adds even more depth to this. It's like he's been brought up with that kind of fear and with that ingrained in him, and he's like, you know, really twisted. But then he's gone on to have a profession which actually involves burning things. And then we get to like all of the kills and all of the good stuff in this film that we usually talk about, which is all relative to all of that background. and he's got an incinerator suit with one of those, the hood that you put on with like the goggles built in, which is creepy as fuck, and he's got a fucking flamethrower.
He's got a flamethrower, everybody.
Yeah, well, you know, if you're looking for like a great weapon to cause a series of deaths with, that's going to be the one, isn't it? It's dramatic. Let's put it that way.
Well, yeah, definitely. Very, very dramatic, especially in the first death, which we're going to talk about in a second. Now, interestingly, this is very heavily derivative of Psycho, which obviously comes up quite a lot because you've got the main character who has a very weird, shall we say, relationship with his mother, and the mother certainly had a lot of negative impact on his life, shall we say, so he's a very disturbed figure. But also, there's another film I quickly want to bring up that this reminded me of quite a lot, is a film called Deranged, from 1974, starring Robert Blossom, who is more well known for being in Home Alone. So he's the creepy old man in Home Alone. So if you imagine like this guy who in one film is basically a serial killer, imagine that's the same character in Home Alone, like I did, and it actually becomes quite amusing. But yeah, it's essentially one of these films which is based on the Ed Gein case, and you've got like this guy who had a weird relationship with his mother, and then his mother dies, as the mother does in this film very early on, and then it kind of really, really negatively impacts the main character, and Donnie in this case, and then they basically go around doing what they think they should do because they hear voices or the mother is speaking to them from beyond the grave. So
yeah, it's a good structure for a horror film, in my opinion. I like it.
In fact, now I think of it, now I've reminded myself of Home Alone. There's actually aspects of this that are actually quite similar to Home Alone. Like when the mother dies, it's quite interesting. The first thing that Donnie decides to do is to sort of play music really loud, because he can do that now that his mother's not there anymore.
Yeah, that does make complete sense. So get you comparing horror films to children's films. I would never do that.
Oh no, definitely. You'd never catch you doing that. No way.
No, certainly no Disney.
But yeah, so comparing Home Alone to this film, none of the incidents in Home Alone are certainly anywhere near as gruesome as, particularly as the first death in this film. So as we've mentioned, there is a massive flamethrower, and Donnie does set up a big room in the top floor of his house, which has got metal inside it. It's kind of like a giant incinerator. Although, interestingly, why he decides to kill women in that very specific way is not really explained all that well. Yes, it's very, very gruesome, and it makes sense that obviously he was tortured with fire when he was a child, but why you would then suddenly think, oh, you know what, I'm just going to go around and kill a bunch of innocent women and burn them to death.
Yeah.
As you do. It's pretty grim.
It's so grim. I'm just scanning through my notes from when I watched it, and in capital letters across the page, I've written dark as fuck. I've put underneath that so painful. And oh man, the fact that he like then dresses up all these burnt women in his mother's clothes and sits them around the house is even creepier.
Yeah, that was another thing that reminded me of Deranged, because the main character in Deranged does something very similar, except with dead bodies as opposed to just charred corpses. So, Donnie, he works in an incinerator, his mother dies, he's very heavily dependent on his mother, he doesn't really get on with people at his job. There's one guy called Bobby who for some reason wants to be his friend, although why that is never really properly explained, because why would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so apart from that, he's sort of by himself with his mother. Mother dies, and then he starts hearing voices.
Yeah, she dies, but he doesn't accept it. He keeps the body there. He hears a voice. As soon as she dies, you see him doing something to her. It looks like he takes a box of matches. It looks like he's burning her skin, but you never really see what he's actually done. And then there's kind of a reveal later on in the film. So you are kind of always thinking, I wonder what he's actually done to her, because you think that you understand that he's like charred her skin and then just left her there, and he still believes that she's there because he's that tapped, but you don't see that till much later.
So the main area of controversy in this film stems from the very first death, which is of a florist. So I'll let you take it away with this one.
Yeah, so although this film it has a lot going on, and it feels like there's a lot of death in it because it is quite extreme. There's only actually 4 deaths in this film. But you will not get... I didn't find this film at all boring, despite there only being three main kills. And then, at the end, spoiler alert, our killer does get killed. But it's well worth watching how he goes out, let's say.
So essentially what happens is, as I say, he hears voices, and the voices tell him to basically, I don't know, I can't really remember what the voices say in terms of whether women need to be punished or something like that, but it's normally something along those lines. That's generally what the voices in people's heads tend to say, quite stereotypically. So he goes to a florist, and the weird thing is, compared to most movies kind of like this, where you meet serial killers, and, you know, they're generally sociopathic, so they're generally sort of quite charming to people, and they have this, they might be attractive, and they have this very charming exterior, and they're actually not like that at all. Whereas this guy, he's a bit of a weedy guy. He's very kind of, I don't know, I mean, I've heard people say that he's actually quite pathetic, which is maybe a little bit harsh, but let's put it that way. He's not exactly the kind of person who you would normally probably get women to kind of go home with him sort of on a first night kind of thing. So it's quite interesting.
He is a little bit pathetic. I would say, if I had to sum him up, that he's helpful in this film. He tries to get by. Yes. He tries to get by on being this helpful guy, and then he's just in the right place at the right time to prey on any kind of vulnerability by being helpful, is what I would say.
Yeah, so he kind of comes across as like the helpful stranger. Like, so his first victim in the film, the florist, he goes in there. Now, it's closing time. I used to work in a shop very many years ago, and when you get to about 5 or 10 minutes before closing time, let's say, you really, really don't want to be letting people in because you don't know how long they're going to be there, and you just want to go home. So if you actually had shut, and it was past closing time, if this was me, there was no way I would let anyone in the shop, no matter how insistent they were. But, you know, it's a horror film, so can't think about it too much, I guess. But she lets him in, he buys flowers, and then we cut to sort of her getting into his car because the choice is either that or because she just misses her bus.
Yeah, she misses a bus because of him. He plays the, oh, my mother's sick and I need flowers for her card, which actually, you know, we all know that his mother is actually dead, so it's very ironic and interesting to watch as he blatantly lies about it and uses it to his advantage. She does miss a bus. It is his fault. He says he feels guilty. She's being leered at by 3 guys at the bus stop, which just pushes her to make that decision to get in the car with him. You can tell she's not quite sure, but she does it because she feels threatened by these 3 guys who are like basically making wanking motions towards her and drinking alcohol at the bus stop. So, you know, she's got the choice of the helpful kind of pathetic guy that's just bought flowers for his mother, which seems kind of sweet, unless you know that she's dead, or the guys that are making kind of masturbation gestures towards her at the bus stop while she's like alone. So she gets in the car with him and goes to the house, which is what the film tells us not to do. Don't go in the house.
Yeah, so these films are very, very sort of cautionary tales, shall we say. So we're not going into the woods. We're not going near parks at all. Don't even go near the park. And you don't want to look in the basement. And yes, this is don't go in the house. And that's very apt because there's a giant incinerator in there. So yeah, long story short, she does what the title tells her not to do, and she goes in the house, and instead of just kind of saying, yeah, I'll just go and get a taxi, thanks. Obviously, Uber wasn't a thing back then, so she has to wait to use the phone, and basically she gets knocked out, and this is definitely the most distressing part of the film, because what happens is when she comes to, she is totally naked, and she is chained up in this sort of big metal room. And Donnie comes in wearing his Hazchem suit or fireproof suit, whatever it's supposed to be, wielding a giant flamethrower, covers her in petrol and sets her on fire. And it looks fairly effective for 1979. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, even though you can tell it's like obviously some kind of hanging doll, like it's so effective that it's kind of swinging there while it's on fire, like this limp, lifeless doll, that it's very, very believable. So yeah, it's pretty grim to watch. I wasn't expecting that at all, which
and
is what
her
switched me on to
screams
this
as
film.
well. Like her screaming is very uncomfortable.
Yeah, very uncomfortable. And it plays out for quite a while. We kind of watch this burning corpse while she's screaming. It's extreme. I was not expecting that, so that's what switched me on to this film. I just thought, wow. You don't know what's going to happen next at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen the film before, so I was already aware of that scene. But like, yeah, the first time I saw it, the part that kind of takes you back a little bit is that she's naked. It's like, I don't think she really needed to be naked, in all honesty. Not that I'm, complaining about that aspect of it necessarily, but it's just like, it's not really necessary.
It's not at all necessary, but we know why that's been thrown in there.
Yeah.
She looks good. She's easy on the eyes. So
she's definitely very easy on the eye. 70s women. Yeah, definite hot spot of mine. Rather than the 80s. Women in the 80s looked horrendous.
Too much bodily hair, probably.
No, not even that. Just like all the stupid hair and the makeup they had in the 80s. Like all these women that probably would look really attractive normally, they just look absolutely horrendous. Well, yeah, in the 70s, you didn't really have that. So women are a little bit more natural looking and, yeah, much, much more attractive in my opinion. So that's the only real kind of grim sort of death that we get in the film, because the other deaths, they kind of don't really take place on screen, although they quite blatantly happen.
Yeah. So he then goes on the hunt for more women, goes on a bit of a rampage. So there's a woman with a broken down car. He takes advantage of her, gives her a lift, says that he needs to stop by the house to check on his mum on the way back. The mum's always the excuse, and they always think he's being such a kind, loving son, not realising that she's actually popped her clogs and she's upstairs decaying. So he takes this woman back, same deal as the first lady, the florist, and she's looking around the house, and you can tell like they think it's a bit odd because the kind of the wallpaper's peeling, and it's a bit of a strange looking house inside, like not that well kept. And he does the same thing, doesn't he? I think he just hits her over the head, and then she goes in the incinerator.
Yeah, although, as I said, we don't see that every single time, luckily. I think they kind of knew after the first one, it's like, yeah, we can't do that again. So, so...
Too distressing.
Yes, it'd be very, very distressing. So this one, we just see kind of the before and the after. And then we got our third death.
The third woman is somebody at the store or the supermarket. And I think he offers to help her. I can't remember now what he says to her or how he manages to persuade her, but he offers to help her with something. And she ignores him at first.
Yeah, she does. So what happens is she's got like a heavy bag of shopping, because in America they hadn't heard of plastic bags at this point. So they got those kind of brown paper bags, and he offers to carry it for her. And she's like, nah, you're all right, mate. And he basically won't leave her alone. And then I assume he gets her afterwards, because again, we kind of cut from that to her having a charred body straight afterwards. So again, she dies. I mean, obviously, again, you don't see her dying, but it's 3 deaths in very, very quick succession.
Yeah.
Then you have the parts which are very, very, as I said, reminiscent of a film like Deranged, as I said earlier, and Maniac, which is another film which is very, very similar to this, which came out the year after, where you've got him talking to the dead bodies and his mother's dead body as well, just in case it wasn't clear enough that the guy was mental.
Yeah, and then you see what he's done to her body, and she's completely black all over. And actually, you do get these little scenes where she basically starts to kind of haunt him, but as a charred, kind of witchy-looking creature.
Yeah, he has a few hallucinations. Like, so he has a hallucination where he sees her burnt corpse in a doorway, and there's flames behind her. There's a cool hallucination dream type sequence where he's on a beach and there's all these explosions everywhere, and then he has this dream where these zombies drag him into like a sand pit, which I thought was quite cool.
Yeah, no, the parts where she's like haunting him and he's having these hallucinations are pretty creepy. Her charred body and like all this kind of crazy hair. I would liken it to something like one of the modern horror films, like like your Insidious and kind of things like that, where they have things that just appear in doorways.
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah,
it's a bit like that, but obviously not the all singing, all dancing CGI. It's just like a very sort of basic method of doing it, but it works so well. It's so effective and so creepy. So I really enjoyed that element of it.
And then we have our very slight change of pace, where Donnie, what he does is he goes to see a priest, because I think it was his mother's priest, because she was a very religious woman when she was alive, and he wants to be saved. Like, he thinks that he's doing the wrong thing, and maybe has second thoughts about killing all these women, so he tries to connect to this guy Bobby, who wants to be his friend, and Bobby is basically cheating on his wife, I'm not gonna lie. Blatantly cheating on his wife as well, not even being in the least bit subtle about it, but hey.
And he's trying to get Donnie to support him in that and come along, and Donnie's really not that interested. He just wants to burn people.
Yeah, so he takes Donnie to this funky late 70s disco with appropriately funky music. And
after they've been shopping, and he's bought a suit complete with a blazer that is made especially for dancing with elastic in the seams. Yeah. I thought that was a very enjoyable piece of key information right there. And the guy in the shop tells him it's a Dynamite outfit and you'll steal the show.
Oh, he definitely steals the show. He wasn't wrong about that.
Yeah, he's obviously got intentions of not only setting women on fire, but he's off to set the dance floor on fire at the disco now. Boom.
Fire in the disco. And so he goes there, but he doesn't really seem to be having that good a time. So Bobby tries to set him up with a friend of this girl that he's his bit on the side, shall we say. And long story short, he doesn't really want to dance, and she tries to drag him on the dance floor, but in the process she grabs him by the wrists and is kind of inadvertently pulling his wrists over a candle, and he has flashbacks to his mother doing that, and so he reacts in a very normal way by throwing the candle at her face.
And sets her hair on fire.
Scarring her for life, probably. Yeah, so okay. And then somehow, because this girl's brother's there, and the brother tries to beat up Donnie, but he manages to kind of get away, basically. He managed to overpower this guy and get away without getting beaten up too much. Although he does get beaten up a little bit.
Yeah, and there's this one song called Stop the Boogie Lightning, which keeps playing. Don't know if you noticed that.
Yeah, well, you can't fucking miss it. It's like, it's in the end credits as well. Like that going on. It's like very funky.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah, so he runs away from this guy, manages to get away.
He manages to get away, and then
picks up two drunk girls on the way home.
Which would never happen in a million years in real life. Again, Uber did not exist at this point, or even taxis in general, from the sounds of things. Yeah, you could pick up random women just by having a car back then, so that's where I'm failing.
So they're completely willing to just like get a lift back. So they're wasted, and they're kind of like, they go into his house and they're like, oh, what a cool place, and they're like looking around. He ties them up, but they do actually get found, so they're not on the death list in the end. No,
although I did think that, oh my god, he's going to kill both of them, but he doesn't. And then the Reverend Father Garrity gets set on fire.
Yeah, which is absolutely horrific. It's so effective in the film. And I do believe that they put him out, don't they, and he escapes. Probably with, substantial burns, but I do believe that he escapes. I know you you were saying before that you thought that he might have died, or that would be, one of the deaths.
Though in these slasher films where people do body count lists, sometimes it's hard to tell if the person is actually dead or not, because you see what happens, but you don't know if they're really dead. And this is more an example of that. Although, I don't know, I think in this case we can assume that Bobby put him out.
And because he puts him out fairly quickly, so I would say he escapes with burns. The two girls definitely escape. Nothing happens to them. And then death number 4, although it feels like there are a lot more deaths in this film, but there's only 4 in the end, is Donnie himself, which is such an awesome ending to this film. It's like the mother and all of the spirits of the bodies. It's kind of like supernatural, isn't it? That they all kind of start moving and they actually kill him.
So these 3 women who he's burnt to death plus his mother kind of come to life and they attack him, and basically his house ends up getting set on fire. Now he does die because there is a news report at the end of the film which says there are 5 bodies found in the house, so Donnie, the 3 women and his mother. So he does definitely die as far as we know, although how he dies obviously you don't know, because clearly this is some kind of hallucination that he's having. Yeah,
it's almost like he's gone insane and he set the house on fire himself, and then he's obviously come to an untimely end. But it is like he's driven himself to do that, and like perhaps it's an accident because he's hallucinated, but he was going to go out that way because it all just reached a peak and he got really insane. So he's seen these bodies moving, thinking that they're setting it on fire, but it's probably just him.
It's some kind of hallucination, I think. So I think it's more likely that, yes, he was, he got caught, he got found out, so he was like, oh, fuck. He probably, just ended it all, I imagine. It'd be something like that. And then at the end of the film, I wasn't a massive fan of the ending, I'm not going to lie. It kind of suggests that, like, if you're abused by your mother, it's kind of this thing just passes from abused person to abused person where they suddenly start hearing voices. So it kind of implies that Donnie's died. So these voices obviously then get transferred into this young boy who in the credits is identified as Michael, this young boy's head. So it's like, okay, not really sure about that. Not quite sure how that's supposed to work. So a little bit of a shit ending, but not compared to other films that we've talked about, not the worst. Not great though.
Yeah. There's no connection between those two characters, which is what annoyed me. And also, it's not really a transferable way that he could torture other people with to the point of death. Like, with Donnie, he's been burned, and then he's obviously then got this kind of idea of burning people into his head, which is something that causes death for certain, if you burn somebody. Whereas this Michael kid at the end is just being slapped by his mum kind of across the face. And it's just a bit like, well, that's not really the same concept. Like, he's not just going to walk around the city just slapping women now and again and then think that one of them might drop dead. Like, I get it that there's kind of this pattern and that's what they're tapping into, but like we talked about before, it just feels like a bit of a cop-out. Like, you can't really see it going anywhere, and there's no connection between that kid and Donnie in the film at all, so it's not really a clever way to end it.
Yeah, I think it was more a case of that Halloween had come out the year before, and they were like, maybe they were trying to set up a sequel somehow, or something like that. They were trying to make it a transferable thing, or maybe it's supposed to be Michael Myers. I don't know. It probably isn't, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Just a bit of a shit ending, really. But it doesn't detract from the film. I enjoyed the film. It's not going to be for everyone's taste because it is, as I said, unrelentingly grim. Although it's not as horrible as a few other films I've seen. Sort of, it's not as horrible as something like, I don't know, a Serbian film or something like that. But it's more just the tone is sort of quite downbeat. Sort of similar to Driller Killer in a lot of ways, and Maniac. As I said, Maniac came out the year after this, and it's got a very similar plot in where you've got a guy who obviously has some kind of issues, and he goes around killing women. And in fact, the ending of Maniac is very, very similar. In fact, it's practically identical to the ending of this film. So clearly it was very influential in its own way. But yeah, as I said, I enjoyed it. Definitely. I think it's a good film.
Yeah, I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised by how astoundingly grim it is, and I enjoyed it. And I mean, I've watched a lot of films that are much darker than this and much grimmer, and I'd say that this is very engaging, but it's not too dark to the point where it's like I wish I'd never watched it. It's just very interesting and it's different, so I would recommend it.
Is it a video nasty though? And that's the big question.
Let me think. So, just looking back over my deaths.
Well, I mean, in terms of, I've got while you're kind of having a think about it, I mean, I ummed and ahed about this quite a lot. So for example, I said Driller Killer wasn't a video nasty. Now, I'm a little bit I'm a little bit more lenient in terms of what I consider a video nasty compared to yourself based on our past shows. With this one, there's only really the one scene that is the problematic one, which is the first murder of the girl being set on fire completely naked. I thought, well, I wouldn't ban the film nowadays. I mean, obviously I don't think this film should be banned at all, but if we're looking at it, should this be a video nasty based only on that one death? I'm going to very hesitantly say yes. Just because it's so effective.
As well. Yeah, I'm going to say yes as well, because it's one of those things where back then, when they were deeming something a video nasty, it was more like the concept of, would it influence somebody so negatively that it would twist their view on what is deemed acceptable of how to treat people and put ideas into their head of possibly wrongdoing. And I think that scene would definitely influence people, because it's not the kind of thing that you see anywhere. It's so grim. So I'm going to say yes based on that one scene as well.
Yeah, I think, because in the video Nasties scandal itself, there's the infamous moment where someone, I don't know who, basically showed this highlight video, and I use highlight in inverted commas, of kind of supercut of the nastiest bits of all these films, like Cannibal Holocaust and Driller Killer and Cannibal Ferox and I Spit in Your Grave and stuff like that. Just taking a bit out of context. It's a bit, I'm not gonna lie, it was a bit manipulative really, but my point is, if you took that one death completely out of context and showed it to someone who wasn't a fan of horror, they would absolutely shit themselves. Probably.
Yeah. That does sound like something that you don't want to watch whilst you're having your breakfast.
No. Well, imagine an MP, imagine showing an MP something like that. I mean, they'd probably have a heart attack. They probably wouldn't be able to sleep for weeks. So, because they're weak people generally. But so if this doesn't sound too grim for you, because we both enjoyed the film, you can get it from Arrow, although I don't know how widely available the Arrow release is these days. It came out a few years ago, so it may be very, very soon go out of print. So if you want to get it, it's only available on DVD as far as I'm aware. That's how you do it. But yeah, one definitely recommended, and it's probably the best of the Don't films, although as I did say on our previous Video Nasty show, Don't Look in the Basement, also worth a watch too.
Yeah, I agree. That's high up there on my list. I'm going to recommend it to a few friends.
Wow. So our next film is a slasher film, and it's also about a man who, due to a trauma in his past, hates women, and it's called Visiting Hours. It also has the alternative title of The Freight, or Get Well Soon, which I think is actually a great title, and probably should have used that one instead, just for the irony alone.
Yeah, I like the irony in that.
Yeah, and this is directed by Jean-Claude Lord. It's a Canadian film, and it stars Canadian actors such as Michael Ironside, a great actor from the 80s in such films as Total Recall and Scanners, and interestingly, Hello Mary Lou Prom Night 2. And he is really, really, really good in this film. Very, very convincing. And we're going to talk about him a lot more as we go into the review. But Ria, tell us the synopsis of Visiting Hours.
Okay, so it's a 1982 film, and I've just noticed the tagline on the poster or any of the artwork from back then is "So frightening you'll never recover." And the synopsis is, a deranged misogynistic killer assaults a journalist. When he discovers that she survived the attack, he follows her to the hospital to finish her off. And I'm going to say that I didn't really enjoy this film, and I'm not sure if I would call it a slasher. I think I would say it's more of a thriller to me, but I see what you mean about it being technically a slasher. But I'm not a huge fan of this film, I have to say.
Okay, and now that's quite interesting. I honestly thought you'd probably prefer this to Don't Go in the House. Now, I'm not going to say I loved the film. I thought it was okay to good. It's not something I particularly want to watch again, but I thought it was pretty effective, like little sort of 100-minute long sort of slasher kind of film, even if you don't consider it a true slasher. So I'm curious as to why you were not as impressed with it as I thought you would be.
I just found it very serious, very boring, very average, middle of the road film, very medically correct. It was well made, it's well put together, the acting is great, it's fine, but it's not pushing any boundaries, and I just felt bored. Sorry.
So when you say medically correct, what do you mean by that?
Well, because it's set in a hospital, and then we've got this killer on the loose, so there are deaths in the hospital, but it's all quite sort of easy for that to happen, and it's well researched, and it just makes sense, but there's nothing really surprising about it. Like, nothing's clever, nothing surprising, it's just as you would expect. Middle of the road is how I would describe this film. And it's not terrible compared to a lot of the films that we have watched, which have been fucking terrible. But there's nothing about this film that would make me recommend it to anybody. I'm just like, meh, it's alright, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from. I mean, as I said, I've watched this film twice. I had to watch it twice for the show, and it's not a film that I'd particularly want to watch again. As I said, it's all right. It's kind of, it looks nice and sort of pristine, and, there's obviously a lot of money behind it. So, as I said, you've got Michael Ironside, who I actually really like, and he is definitely the best part of the film. You've got Lee Grant, who is an Oscar winner. She won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for Shampoo, and she also appeared in Damien Omen 2, and also William Shatner, which is obviously quite amusing.
Yeah, he's in there. I love William Shatner.
Yeah, so they could obviously afford a reasonably good cast, but it's all right. It's not as good as The Burning or The Funhouse or films like that. I don't regret watching it. I didn't think it was a waste of my time. I mean, I kind of see where you're coming from, but I didn't dislike it, really. It was just
it's exactly what you just said, though. It's pristine, which I think is why I don't like it. It's not gritty. It's not different. It's just as you would expect, and there's nothing really wrong with the film. I just kind of think it's the kind of film that probably my mum would prefer than me.
Definitely not my mum. My mum would never watch this in a million years. So,
well, she would probably hide her eyes a couple of times, but it's the kind of thing that she would think was really good in terms of how it's shot, and the fact that it's in a hospital and there's a bit of drama and it's a thriller. For me, it's just it's not a horror film to me. It's more of a thriller, and it's just meh.
Okay, so basically the story of the film, for anyone who's not seen it, is you've got Lee Grant is a reporter called Deborah Ballin, and she essentially is on TV at the start of the film. She's got a show. William Shatner is her producer, and basically she's doing the show about this woman who killed her husband in self-defense because he was beating her up, basically, and she's in prison, and she's essentially trying to get this woman off. And Michael Ironside's character, who's called Colt, he really, really takes great offence to this, to the point that he tries to kill Deborah Ballin throughout the film. So it's okay, so you got this guy who's basically really hates the fact that women defend themselves, essentially, and he's very, very psychotic. And it's quite interesting that one of the things I notice in this film is every woman has in some way been damaged by a man. So Deborah Ballin, Lee Grant's character, she's divorced, and obviously she's being attacked by this a psychopathic man who kind of, hates women who defend herself. The main nurse character is divorced. You've also got another character who's sort of a smaller character who almost gets killed by Michael Ironside, but sort of gets away without being killed, although she does get bitten on her back.
I didn't like that scene, yeah, with the big tough guy with like the kind of black PVC top and the that girl that got beaten up with the pink jumpsuit on. That was a bit much.
Yeah, so Michael Ironside wearing what appears to be a PVC black vest, which was the height of 80s fashion, I'm sure.
She's in a pink jumpsuit.
Yes.
And a lot of fake tan.
Yeah, I would say she was quite attractive. So, but yeah, that's the only really troubling scene in the whole film, really, is that one, because you've got basically knife foreplay, essentially, because Michael Ironside's character, what he does is he kind of pins this woman down and starts running a knife while she's not really naked. There's no nudity in this film, which is maybe another issue, that it's a little bit sterile, so there's not really a lot of violence either. It's just
she doesn't die, she just gets beaten up. That's the most distressing part of the film, I think. And then we managed to squeeze 8 deaths out of this film somehow. So
yes. So take us away with the 8 deaths in the film, as you said.
Okay, so initially there's a housekeeper, but she dies off screen, so we assume that she's died, which isn't really that major part of the film.
Yeah, so basically what happens is at the start of the film, Deborah Ballin goes back to her house because her housekeeper is an alcoholic, from the sounds of things. Kind of keeps leaving bottles of alcohol around the house. So gonna shout her. One of the things that I found quite amusing is that her house has a massive aquarium in it, and there's a lot of slasher films that for some reason have an aquarium in them somewhere, normally to find a severed head, like for example when we talked about Night School. Same thing kind of there.
Yeah.
So I found that quite amusing. So Colt is there and basically chases her, and I thought, this scene was quite effective. There was a lot of tension at the start, and then he attacks Deborah Ballin, but she manages to get away relatively unscathed, although, as you said, her cleaner does not.
Yeah, so the cleaner's the first death, but it's off screen. And then we move on back to the hospital, and there's a older woman on life support that's in the room where she should have been. So they swapped her out of that room, didn't they?
Yeah, so for some reason, which is not really clear, because it's not as if they know that she's there because there's a guy in the hospital trying to attack her. So they just happen to move her into a different room. And Colt, now one of the things I find funny about this film is that the security in this hospital is the lapsest security I've ever seen in any hospital ever. This would never happen in the NHS, because if you've ever been to an NHS hospital, it's too busy, someone would notice. But
yeah.
Even at one point, William Shatner's character says a really, really hilarious thing, about how, they got a great security system here. They've got cops on the door, they've got all this stuff. But, Michael Ironside's still able to get into this hospital really, really easily and kill people and get out again. So it's okay, that's clearly not true.
Well, mediocre security in a mediocre film.
There we go.
Anyway, so there's this poor older lady on life support, and he comes in and he just cuts her the pipe for the air to come through from her life support. So she's just fading out on the bed. It's quite distressing, really.
Yeah. And similarly to another film we've talked about on the show, Island of Death, the killer takes pictures of people as they're dying.
Yeah, so he takes some pictures, and then a nurse comes in to see where she's up to just check on her, and he can't have her then seeing what he's done because he's still in the room, so he stabs the nurse with a pair of pliers, I think it is, and covers her mouth so that she doesn't scream, and then he kind of puts her props her up behind the door or in a cupboard or something, and she's found when the nurse comes in, who's one of the main characters in the film.
Yes, so this is Sheila, who is sort of the main nurse in the film, who's looking after Deborah Ballin. Now, quite interestingly, she goes home, and again, it's one of those scenes where, at home, and they're trying to create tension because you think, we might get attacked. Now, one thing that slightly confused me, I don't think this is the case, but did you think that she was a lesbian?
There was that one scene, wasn't there, where there were two of them on the bed.
Yeah, because I was like, hang on, this doesn't make sense. Well, first of all, she had kids. Now, I'm not suggesting for a minute that people can't, like women in that way and not have kids. But I just thought it was a bit weird for a film made in like 1982 or 1981 that, like, she obviously had kids and been married before. And it's like, I think the other woman was a babysitter. Now, I don't think she actually is a lesbian, but it was very interestingly that, like, this girl just basically got out of the shower and she's basically covered only in a towel and kind of gets in bed next to her. And I was like, oh, okay, is it that kind of relationship then? It's like, okay.
That's exactly what I thought, but then they never discussed it or referred to it at all. It was just skipped over as though it wasn't really a big deal, but yeah, it did look to me like she'd obviously decided after that husband had been put in jail that she wasn't going to go down that route anymore.
No, and then you have there weren't really any deaths for a while, and then you have the scene that we kind of referred to earlier where you have a character called Lisa who... Now, I always find it very amusing in these films, like the previous film we talked about, where these guys who are clearly very psychopathic, they seem to get all the ladies. The ladies love these guys who like killing women for whatever reason. So he's got two women.
Edgy and dangerous, and they like the bad boys, I see.
They've got daddy issues, probably. So they go back to his place, and he's got all these letters that he's written to these various TV companies, like I imagine old people do, because they have nothing better to do with their time. So he's writing all these letters, and basically, long story short, is that he threatens her in a way, very ominously and sexually. And I say this is the only slightly troubling bit of the film, because he basically pins her down and he's running a knife. So if you imagine it, so she's covered up. As I said, no nudity in this film. She's basically not got any trousers on, but the rest of her is covered.
Yeah, she's got knickers on and she's got a very tight top on, so there's no nudity needed, but it is like obvious that they've picked her for this scene and she looks very sexy. They've made it very obvious in this scene, her body shape through the clothes. It's like lycra or something. Yeah,
it doesn't leave a lot to the imagination, shall we say. And he runs a knife up her body and he turns her over, and it was a quite threatening scene, I thought. And then you cuts away and you don't really see what happens after that. Now, coming back to sort of the politics of the film, because the politics of this film I think are a bit more interesting than the film itself. What these sections of the film seem to suggest that, like, it's bad for women to fight back, essentially, which is like...
Well, no, I didn't feel that was necessarily the message of the film. The bigger message that I had considered right from the beginning was the fact that she was quite a powerful woman and she could reach a lot of people as a respected journalist, and she had like a political message that he didn't want her to deliver, and that's somebody close to her or her other half is telling her that at the beginning of the film. She's like, why is he after me? And he's saying, well, he doesn't want you to put out the second part of this message because you've got a lot of power. So for me it was like almost preventing a woman from being empowered and rising up and influencing other people. That's what I felt the message was. Not that they shouldn't fight back, but just that they shouldn't have that much power and that he resented it. So for me, that was more important than all of this, the sort of downtrodden female theme that's running through it. That's like typical struggles of horror or thriller films anyway. Although there does seem to be a lot more of it in this film than your average.
Yeah, I mean, the film has been called misogynistic. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I kind of see it the same way as you do, in that, yes, it's a bit of a weird kind of motivation for the murderer, the killer, to have, but it's just a reason, really, for murders to happen. And you've got a hospital, so the murders happen to take place in a hospital, which has got this very sterile environment. Like you mentioned, the film is quite sterile. It's actually quite ironic that it's set in a hospital.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, most of the murders do take place in a hospital. So going back to our body count, so we've got our fourth victim.
There's a guy in a wheelchair. I think it's the guy with the moustache.
Yeah, so his name is Vinnie Bradshaw, and he's there for a little bit of comic relief, which it's a little bit misplaced. I don't know what it is with people in wheelchairs in slasher films, but they don't seem to live very long. It's like you've got our guy in Don't Go in the Woods.
Oh god, yeah.
And obviously Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah, it's a bit un-PC, that, isn't it? It's kind of not funny, but they always seem to use it as a comedic element.
So he gets killed not in his wheelchair, and he isn't decapitated like our gentleman in Don't Go in the Woods. He is killed in his bed. Yeah,
so he's stabbed actually, isn't he? But does he put a stress ball in his mouth?
Yeah. So Colt, what he has during this the film, his tick that he has a stress ball that he squeezes sort of when he's getting particularly angry, because he doesn't really talk very much in this film, this character. He says very, very few words. He says about as many words as Ryan Gosling says in Only God Forgives, which is not many for anyone who's seen that film. But yeah, he's sort of this very angry, brooding, kind of almost mute guy who's, very quiet. And yeah, he stuffs his stress ball in the guy's mouth and stabs him to death.
Yep, as you do. And in a very sterile environment, I might add. And then death number 5, a policeman gets pushed through a window.
Yeah, now it's interesting, like, because I don't know if this counts as a death or not, but I mean, he doesn't move. I suppose you could die from being thrown through a window, although it's not really obvious. But as part of the melee, this policeman gets thrown through a window.
And then there's actually a man who gets his life support turned off, which is like going back to our second death. So that's a running theme, is that he's just kind of going into hospital rooms where people are quite helpless in their beds and just switching off their life support or cutting it off.
Yeah, although it's either because he thinks it's someone else, or in this case it's more to cause a distraction to kind of get the nurses out of the way. And the next death in the film is for a similar reason. So there's a security guard or a policeman at the door of the main character, and he breaks his neck so that he's not there.
He breaks his neck. I can't quite remember how he does it. Does he just do it with his hands?
Yeah, he does it with his bare hands because he's a big tough motherfucker. Exactly, very manly.
Yeah, and then our final death is actually Colt, who gets stabbed in the stomach.
Yeah, so we have our sort of very typical kind of final goal, although in this case, again, it's always the way in slashery type films where, the killer is able to kill the other victims really easily, no trouble whatsoever, do it really effectively, and then as soon as you get to the last one is able to kind of fight back, and it's kind of like they almost become completely useless. And this is kind of an example of that. What's really funny in this one is that the person he's chasing has one arm because the other one's in a sling. She's been through a hospital operation, so she's really kind of not really fully with it anyway, and she's quite old. She's like in her 40s, I would say. So and yet she's still able to get away from this guy.
Yeah, and the other woman who's there at the end is our lovely blonde, possibly lesbian nurse who had a broken rib, and she had some kind of device stuck into her mouth or around her throat to help her to breathe. So she's really helpless, and she's just kind of propped up at the end, and it's like they've both survived. But yeah, it's just kind of straight. You feel so sorry for the blonde nurse because she's like, she needs some serious medical attention.
Yeah, and that's actually quite clever because what Colt does is, because he needs to draw all the police away from the hospital, doesn't he? So they know where he lives. So what he does, and this is actually quite, I'd say, a pretty clever thing to do, is that essentially he knows they're all going to go to his house. So what he does is he takes an overdose, and then he basically self-harms. He really, really cuts open his arm to make it look like he's tried to commit suicide. And then, an ambulance is called, takes him to the hospital, and all these people are going to his house. So he can get into the hospital pretty much, without being noticed or anything like that. So you say everyone in this hospital is completely useless.
Yeah, he gets in as a victim, admitted as a victim, but really he's okay. He's just done it in such a way where it looks pretty bad. That was a clever part. He put like a belt around his arm I presume that's to get all the blood flowing down to the lower part of his arm so that it would so it would bleed more. And then he like mashes up glass bottles on a chopping board, and then he just goes at his arm on this chopping board with all the glass. It's pretty crazy. So that was a clever part. And then that's how he gets inside the hospital again to sort of go off on a rampage.
Yep, but he doesn't live until the end of the film. It's in that very stereotypically slasher way. It's him against the main character, and then the main character stabs him through a curtain, through his stomach, and he basically dies.
Yeah, and that's death number 8. I can't quite believe that there were 8 deaths in this film, actually.
Yeah, it's as we mentioned earlier, this is a mainstream horror film of the time, although it's still better than what a lot of mainstream horror films are these days, let's be honest. It's pretty... there is blood, but not a lot. It's not that gory. There's not really any nudity or anything like that. As I said, I thought it was all right. It's not gonna, rock your world or anything like that. If you told me this was your favourite film, I probably think that you haven't seen enough horror films personally. But, it's okay. It's just all right, as you said.
Yeah, I like that William Shatner's in it. That's about all that I like.
Yeah, William Shatner he's a pretty awesome presence. Not the greatest actor in the world, but he's a welcome presence in any film. Let's put it that way. So key question is, and this one might be slightly interesting as well, is this a video nasty?
No.
I agree. You sound very sort of fuck this. Fuck this film. No, I don't think it is either. There is only one scene that's a little bit kind of questionable that they did cut out at the time, which is maybe the reason why this is on the list, which is the scene with the knife that we mentioned earlier. But even then, the girl's not naked or anything like that. It's just kind of threatening, but nothing really more than that, to be honest. Yeah,
I'm gonna say no.
Yes, I agree. So yeah, we're agreeing on everything today. It's pretty awesome. Unfortunately, if you're a slasher fan and Ria's apathy towards the film and my kind of meh, it's alright attitude to the film haven't put you off, unfortunately the film's not available in the UK currently, although I wouldn't be surprised if someone like 88 brought this out at some point as part of that.
Damn, what a shame.
Yeah, don't sound too enthusiastic or anything. So you will, as I mentioned previously, you will have to seek alternative means of watching this if you do want to see it, if you are a Nasties completist like ourselves. Which brings us to our last film of the show today, and it's our third film about a man who kills women because of incidents in his past, although this is very slightly different, and this film is called Delirium, and it's directed by Peter Maris. It also has the alternative title of Psycho Puppet, which is maybe a slightly better title. The only reason I say that is because Delirium is actually a very popular title in and of itself. There are actually 2 gialli called Delirium. There's a Renato Porcelli giallo called Delirium from 1972, which is completely insane, like a lot of Porcelli's work. I kind of recommend that one if you like gialli that are completely batshit mental. And there's also a giallo by Lamberto Bava. It's kind of a giallo / a hybrid called Delirium Photos of Goya, which is a very weird kind of giallo. A bit more kind of straightforward than the other Delirium. But yeah, my point being is that Delirium is quite a popular title, so it's quite easy to get confused between all the different sort of films with that name. What's also confusing is the plot of the film, as Ria will discuss right now.
Okay, so yeah, it's a 1979 film, which is classed as a thriller. And I wasn't too clear on what the plot was when I was actually watching it at first, but I do have the summary which will shed some light onto that. So, an ex-soldier is hired by local right-wingers as a vigilante to clean up criminals and street people. However, he freaks out and starts killing off everybody.
Yes, although by everyone we mostly mean women, because he does kill one guy, but it seems to be mostly women that he has the issues with.
Yeah, I've got my death count here, which is actually 8, so it's quite high again.
But yes, as you said, the main issue with the film is that it's very confusing to follow because it seems to be two films going on at the same time. So you have one storyline where you've got a guy, Charlie, great name, going around killing people seemingly for no reason, and then you've got this other storyline in the background where you've got like this underground sort of military resistance group going around kind of killing all these criminals, or I don't know, bringing them to vigilante justice or something like that. It's just a very confusing film. And then alongside that you have these really inappropriate police officers as well.
Yeah, and pair with that the fact that the copy that I was watching, or the one that was available, is very poor quality with a very bad picture and looks incredibly aged, so it just made it difficult to watch from that point of view as well.
Yes, so gritty is good, but when we're talking like such low grade that it's actually difficult to watch, that's very bad, everybody. Like when you can't really make out what's going on because it's too dark and the image quality is too shit, that really doesn't help matters at all.
Not quite as bad as the Ghastly ones, which was utterly terrible.
Oh,
but
God. I get PTSD flashbacks from that fucking film, so never mind like PTSD that happens in this film. Jesus.
Does it bring back bad memories?
Yes.
Yeah, so what did you make of this film then, Greg?
Well, it's not as bad as the Ghastly ones, I can tell you that for nothing. It's also, I mean, the film, let's face it, is not very good. It's not the worst film that we've watched in this series. I think there are at least 5 films that I can name that I think are worse than this, but it's not good. Let's face it, it's pretty shit. It's pretty ropey. Acting's not great. Just the storyline, as we established, is very confusing and very difficult to follow. And it's not even like the film is completely incomprehensible either, or particularly too fast, like Don't Go in the Woods was. It just seems to be that like you had one story and then you had another story and you've kind of crowbarred them together. You know, it just, it just really didn't really make a lot of sense. And yeah, like, I mean, the main female character is quite interesting. Well, not interesting, that's not what I mean. She was quite a good character in that she seemed nice enough. The police were very sleazy. One very sleazy police officer in particular. And Charlie doesn't talk, don't know why he's killing these women. He has these random sort of Vietnam flashbacks that are clearly not set in Vietnam. They're clearly set in, like, I don't know, Oregon or something like that.
Yeah, that's so true. And like the delirium of his flashbacks to Vietnam, or the time that he was in the army, is probably where the title comes from. And it's interesting that I looked up the definition of delirium because I was interested in how they were creating this feeling using the music and the flashbacks. And the definition of delirium is an acutely disturbed state of mind characterized by restlessness, illusions, and incoherence occurring in intoxication, fever, and other disorders. So his PTSD is where the title comes from, but they create this kind of delirium using screechy violins and flashbacks and just like uncomfortable setting and erratic behaviour, essentially.
Yeah. So as I said, this is different from the other 2 films we talked about on the show, where it's not like, oh, it was their mother. I mean, he may have had like an abusive mother for all we know. We don't really know very much about Charlie. But it does seem to be that like a bunch of stuff happened in Vietnam, and that's led him to go around killing women for some reason or another. I don't know. The characterization in this film is pretty thin, not gonna lie.
I'll whiz through the deaths then, because we don't think that this film is outstanding, so we may as well get to the good bits, really.
Well, yes, good being like a very relative term, shall we say.
Yeah. So the first death is there's a brunette lady in kind of a blue shirt or robe. She's stabbed with a knife through a door, and it's almost like a vision or a flashback, and that's how we start out the film, mostly.
Yeah, I believe it's actually with a spear, which is quite weird. But why someone would keep a spear in their house, I don't know. It's just asking for trouble, really. This death kind of reminded me of a very similar death in Island of Death, that film again. But it wasn't as good, and pretty low budget, just someone impaled on a door, as you say.
Yeah, the second death is very interesting. There's a blonde lady who strips off naked and she goes into the sea and she's beckoning him to come in there and she gets drowned. And this is the first inkling that we've got of his like mania and the voices in his head and the torment that he's been through with women previously where he's been mocked sexually. There's some like connotation of that. And he reaches this point where he turns on her, and that's like it. So it's built out of that, like it starts from there really. And the music and the whole scene on the beach is just laughably ridiculous and weird, really weird. So that scene, it shouldn't be funny, but it did have me in stitches because I was just so bewildered.
Yeah, I think you're underselling it a little bit. So what you've got to, well, anyone who's watched the film, which is probably like 6 people, well, basically what happens is you've got this girl who's hitchhiking and she's dressed pretty sort of, no, she's not wearing a lot of clothing, let's put it that way. One thing I noticed is half the women in this film seem to be wearing Daisy Dukes, which I thought was pretty funny. She gets into the guy's car. The guy doesn't talk to her at any point. He looks very strange and very threatening, and she keeps trying to make conversation with him. He crashes the car, right, because he has a flashback. And at this point, this girl doesn't think, yeah, that was pretty dangerous, I should probably go away. No, he's on the beach and she goes over to try and talk to him again, and then she says, oh, I'm going to go skinny dipping now. So it's like, what? It's just beggars belief. I think she might be the stupidest character in any horror movie ever that I've ever seen.
Just walked right into that death,
the
basically.
Lack of logic is just unbelievable. I know, like, obviously there's a thing about in horror movies, like, women being stupid, but this might be the tip of the stupid iceberg, the cherry on top of a very stupid cake, let's put it that way. So
oh, I like the sound of stupid cake.
Well, I don't want to be misogynistic, but she's a dumb bitch, basically.
Yeah, as is the running theme in this film. That's like one of the weirdest, most ridiculous, most stupid deaths, which is laughably so. She just walks right into that. And then the third death, there's a girl in a barn, and she ends up with a pitchfork through her neck, which is kind of an interesting death visually. Quite liked it, but again, she's had some of this stupid cake.
Yeah, and once again, call back to a previous show, not as good as the pitchfork death in The Slayer.
Exactly. So it's all right, but it's not up there. It's not amazing. Then there's like some kind of flashback to Nam, to an army base, and there's like a brunette, and we assume she's a prostitute, and she's like giving him a back massage, and he ends up strangling her.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that we're in Vietnam and it's a prostitute. So maybe Stanley Kubrick saw this before he made Full Metal Jacket. Because, yeah, you got, I Love You Long Time, although it's not really like that. But, it's remarkably kind of similar, although in Full Metal Jacket, the soldier doesn't kill the prostitute. So
yeah, so there's that happens. And then we go to another scene where it's like Sherry is getting a shower upstairs, or she's getting in the bath. And there's a grocery delivery guy or somebody who's dropping off some food for her, and he comes in, and our killer comes in after him, chops off his arm with a cleaver, and she's like upstairs observing this, so she kind of gets off lightly. So death number 5 is the grocery delivery guy, and then death number 6, Cherry shoots Charlie, who is the one who's cut off the arm of the grocery guy, shoots him with a shotgun, and so that all happens in quick succession. So that's death number 6.
Yes. Now you'd think, like, again, this is why the film is confusing, because Charlie, who we've been following as the person killing all these people, he, with about half an hour of the film to go, he is no longer in the film, which is very confusing. So the remainder of the film, it kind of completely switches to, as I said, this underground sort of ex-military men who were in war with Charlie. So basically, the story of the film, which is very, very convoluted, but essentially this group, they're a vigilante group, they're paid by people who basically things have happened to them. There's been a crime, and they don't feel that it was resolved correctly, and the person got away with it. So essentially, what they're doing is they're paying these people to basically kidnap them and kind of have these kangaroo court sessions, which are absolutely amazing for a reason I will go into in a second. Please don't spoil it. But basically, it's to set them up and make it look like they've hung themselves. So the police, while they're investigating Charlie, they're also investigating these sort of people who are criminals, well-known criminals who have apparently committed suicide, and they don't believe it. Although there's a great line that one of the policemen has earlier in the film, because they're trying to investigate Charlie because they don't know who he is at this point. They say, maybe he's one of those weirdos that goes around office buildings sizing up the broads.
There's another bit where one of them says, son of a bitch is crazy, which I quite liked.
Yes, so, right, I want everyone to imagine, right, so you're in this underground bunker type layer of this vigilante group. So they're bringing in this guy for a prisoner who they've taken hostage, and they're sort of passing down judgment on him. And I want you to imagine that this is going on, and then suddenly this music starts up in the background, which is dun 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 dun. Dun-dun. Which, if anyone doesn't know, that is the theme from a TV show, Mastermind.
I've started, so I'll finish.
Exactly. Every British person who watches this film makes that exact same joke because it's there. This is the risk of using stock footage because you don't know where this stock footage has been used before. So they probably found this in a library and thought, oh, this sounds quite a cool little song. And then for people like us, they just end up taking the piss out of it years later because it's like, well, that's the theme song from Mastermind. So, and it's a very recognisable song as well. It's great. So I just pissed myself laughing when that was going on.
It's so funny. It just adds this instant element of comedy to this, and then they even put it on the final credits at the end,
and that was amazing. So it actually
just
plays 3 times in the whole film, which is incredible. It's just I can't take it seriously. It's fucking Mastermind.
I wonder what our ex-soldiers' chosen subject was.
So that was really the only entertaining bit of the film. Really, the rest of the film is just, you didn't like Visiting Hours and you thought that was a bit meh. This is meh for very different reasons. It's just sort of very meh, low budget filmmaking, got pretty stupid female characters, got sleazy cops. So we've got a cop who, the main female character, she is a secretary, and she's the friend of the first person who dies in the film. And the cop's basically kind of like, asking her out, basically taking her on dates during an investigation. I'm pretty sure that's not ethical. I'm pretty sure you're not allowed to do that, in the real world. But,
yeah.
Oh well. Yeah,
like I say, shoddy film. Mastermind music just makes it complete.
So, just to round it off. So there are 2 more deaths in the film.
Yep. So death number 7. There's a police chase and there's a driver which gets randomly shot and then the car blows up. It's very dramatic.
Yeah, it blows up in that exact same way as the van did in Don't Go Near the Park. It's just absolutely hilarious. Yeah. It's like they triggered explosives to go off, like sort of in the car itself while it was going off. It just looked so, again, fake and over the top. So that made me laugh as well.
Yeah, it's by no means small, is it? It's completely over the top. He didn't stand a chance of surviving that.
No,
not only did he get
would.
shot, but he got blown the fuck up as well.
He probably got disintegrated in the explosion.
Yeah. So there's no pieces of that vehicle remaining. And then, so she's still held hostage at this point. There's a lot of kind of shuffling around with that.
Yeah, so Susan, the main female character, is basically, she goes, she tries to investigate these people themselves, which is never a good idea when, like, your friend's been killed. You're just like, you've got police for these things, love. You don't need to try and solve everything yourself. It's all a bit kind of like Scrappy-Doo, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's face it. So she obviously gets taken hostage because, again, all the women in this film are not portrayed very well. They're all basically portrayed as idiots, and this is kind of no exception. And then, essentially, there's a big old shootout. And people
That's
die.
it, yeah, really. Our main guy, what's he called? Eric
Stem.
Eric Stem. He comes out with like a machine gun, I think, and he's just firing all over the show. There's a big old shootout. And he looks pretty badass, but he does not survive. So he gets shot by one of the police officers, I think. And then there's some more Mastermind music, which makes it all right. And that's it. End of the film. Dun 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 dun. Da, da.
Exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. Not expecting that little twist in there.
No, I mean, that put it kind of on a level above something like, I don't know, I Miss You, Hugs and Kisses, where it's like, the film wasn't really very interesting. I mean, it is, I don't even think the film's that misogynistic, really, because the film's just that low budget and really that kind of, I wouldn't say completely inept, but it's not really been thought through that well that it might come across as a bit misogynistic, but not really. I mean, video nasty, no.
It's just a bit ditzy. It's not really maliciously misogynistic. It's not really like pointing the finger that much. Video nasty, it is not. I'm agreeing with you.
No, exactly. I totally agree. I mean, I've never heard a film described as ditzy before. That's a new one on me. But yeah, it's just misplaced, I think. It's kind of more what I'd say. It's just like not really thought through, not that interesting. Not available in the UK either, so you'll be shocked to hear like the 7th generation version that we saw, which was very difficult to watch at certain points just because it was so low grade. Yeah, one for completists only, I believe, is the correct expression for this one.
Yeah, so in summary, Don't Go in the House is worth a watch, but the other two I wouldn't really rate.
No, I
can't get that time back.
Well, yeah, Don't Go in the House, I agree, is worth a watch. Visiting Hours, I thought was alright. I didn't dislike it as much as Rhea did. I mean, it's not essential, but I mean, it's better than Delirium. Delirium is not really very good, apart from Mastermind, which is absolutely amazing that it's even in there to begin with. And to be honest, it's the only reason that really anyone fucking talks about this film at all, really, which kind of tells you exactly everything you need to know. So that brings us to the end of the show. I want to thank you all very much for listening. I enjoyed doing this show a lot for everybody. So please subscribe to us on iTunes, on YouTube, subscribe to our Facebook page, and you can also follow us on Twitter at Lament Horror. Please do, because we appreciate the support a lot.
Yeah, thank you to everybody who's messaged to let us know that they're subscribed and that they listen to every episode. It really means a lot. As always, I've been Reoffend. I've got my own Facebook page, which is Reoffend, and I'm on Instagram and Twitter as well for my my modelling pages, aside from the podcast, which is Ria_Fend. And as Greg so rightly mentioned, I've got a few followers on Instagram. Which apparently, so this island does exist that you've spoken of.
Yeah, I've not made this up out of thin air. It is a real place.
Actually, you've done your research, and he's calculated that is actually true information. So I wasn't expecting that, but hey, what a turn up for the books. That's cool.
It's in the Pacific. You can look it up and everything after the show. Yes, you have more followers than there are people on that island.
Excellent. Okay.
So, on that note, I'm going to leave you with the only thing we can possibly leave you with at this point. Bye, everyone.
Bye.